Welcome back to the Witchy Concoction Spooky Tutorial. In this section we are going to write the script that goes into the touch part. So in your Explorer window, find the part that we named TP when we made this cauldron. And that was the invisible part that we named TP. It's like a square block. Okay, so when the player runs up and touches that, this script is going to run or execute. So the first thing you need to do is have that part highlighted, click the plus sign, and insert a script. When a script is put into your experience, it'll always have the print statement on line 1. It's a default that Roblox has built in, and you can just erase that. Okay. So the first thing we are going to write in the script is our variables, and I'm going to put a title. Variables. Now, anytime you put 2 dashes in front of, that grays out that line so that when you press play and the game is being played, it ignores that line and does not treat it like code. So it's a way that you can write notes into your script. But it has to have the 2 dashes in front of it. Okay, so the first variable we are going to write is for the TP part. So we're going to write local TP equals script dot parent. Okay, so I want to explain local to you. Local restricts this variable to the current scope of what I'm doing. And what am I doing right now? I'm writing the script. So local keeps this variable in the scope of this script. If I were writing a function or an if statement and I set a variable and put local in front of it, it's restricting that variable to the function or to the if statement. So that's what local does. TP is just the name of my variable, and I can name it anything that I want to name it. The equal sign sets it, and then on the right side of the equal sign is the value that is being stored for that variable. It's like a definition, and we follow the hierarchy setup to write out that value. Okay, the next variable is going to be local Boolean equals false. Okay, a Boolean is either true or false. It's a way to toggle back and forth, like an on and off switch. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is variables for some remote events. And I have 3 remote events that we're going to use in this script. And a remote event is a event that fires so that it can send data or information either from the server to the client or from the client to the server. So it creates a bridge of sending that data over. Because you may have the server, and you may have the clients. So the server would be like the servers housed within Roblox, or the main container for the game or the experience. And then you have all of the clients, which would be the devices, like somebody's personal laptop or somebody's mobile device or somebody's PC. So in order to send data from what happens in the main game over to all of the clients, so everyone can see what one client had happen in their game, it has to cross that bridge, and it can go back and forth from client to server or server to client. And you'll see this when we're writing our scripts moving forward, because we are going to be using remote events. And to set up a remote event, I'm putting it in replicated storage, and I've already got some events set up, but you don't yet, so we need to set those up. So in order to insert a remote event, highlight replicated storage, click the plus sign, and then insert remote event. And you need 3. So after you insert the one, you can right click it and duplicate it 2 more times. And now we are going to change the name of each of the remote events. So the first one needs to be called Change GUI. So right click and rename, and then type Change GUI. And notice the capital letters versus the lowercase letters, because when you write your script, you'll have to duplicate it exactly. And the next one is going to be called Count Event. And the third one is going to be called All Found. And I've already got those set up, so I've just created duplicates for myself, so I'm just going to delete those because I don't need them since I already had them set up. Alright, so now we're going to write the variables for those 3 remote events. Local remote equals game.replicated storage dot change GUI. So the name I gave this variable is remote, and then on the right side I'm storing the value following the hierarchy. Local count event equals game.replicated storage dot count event. And then local all found equals game.replicated storage dot all found. Okay. So remember, you can name the variable whatever you want to name it. But when you are storing the value, you have to follow the hierarchy. Okay, and that's where your spelling and your caps and your lowercase letters matter. It has to match identical to what you actually named it. Okay. Okay, next we're going to set up a variable for the shapes folder that is in Workspace that holds all of the tools that we made. And so I'm going to name it shapes. Local shapes equals game.workspace whoops, I misspelled. Game.workspace dot shapes colon get children. So I just set up a variable that is like a table, because this variable holds the children of shapes. And if we open up the shapes folder, if we click the arrow next to it, everything inside of there is the children. So this variable now holds those children. So it's become a table. All right. Local players equals game get service players. Okay. So here we're just defining, we're setting a variable for players, and we're defining the hierarchy for players on the right side. Okay, next I'm going to make another note, and this I'm going to call counter variable. Okay, because I'm going to set up a count. Local count equals 0. And you'll see what this is going to do a little bit later in the script. But a counter can be used to count when something happens in your script, and you can keep track of that count. And as it increments up, you can now use those numbers to do things in your code. And now I'm going to set up a note for tables. Okay. I'm going to set up 2 tables. Local color equals open and close curly brackets. And local PLRT equals open and closing curly brackets. So a table stores data in a variable, and then later you can use that data in the table. Okay, so right now these 2 tables are empty because there's nothing in between the 2 brackets. So I'm setting them up. Now I'm going to set up some functions. And functions are blocks of code that can be used later in script. And you have to call your function in order for it to execute. Alright, to write a function, we write local function, and then whatever the name of that function is going to be. So I'm going to name this one reset t, open and close parentheses, and enter. Now whatever I write in between these 2 lines is the code that'll be executed whenever I call this function that I've named reset t. And I'm setting this function up to reset the tables because we're making a little mini round, and at the end of that round I need everything to reset, including these tables. I will need them to reset back into their original condition. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm going to write color equals curly brackets. And player T equals curly brackets. Okay. And later on in code, when I call this function, I would type out the function name with the open and closing parentheses, and you'll see that later in the code when we do that. Now I'm going to do another function called reset. So I'm going to have two functions that deal with reset. The first one is going to reset the tables. The other reset is going to reset other things. So the first thing I'm going to reset is the debounce, because at some point my debounce is going to change to true, but when I reset I need to change it back to false. And actually up above I named it Boolean. I'm going to change that to debounce. Debounce is a common name used for a Boolean. Okay, and now I'm going to define the shapes variable again. Same as we did above. I'm going to reset the count to 0, because as we do the code later on, the count is going to increment up. But when the round resets, I need the count to go all the way back to 0 again, so that when the code starts again, it starts with the original count, which was 0. Okay. Next, I'm going to use a table loop to iterate through the shapes. Okay? And what I write inside of the table loop, it's going to iterate through each shape and run code on each of those. So when I look into shapes, these are all of the children. So it's going to execute code on each one of these. That's what a table loop will do. So the way you write a table loop is for I, v in pairs, open and close parentheses, do, and then enter. And then, as you can see, it automatically put it in for me. And so whatever code I write inside of this is what will execute on that table. Okay, and remember how I said shapes is a table because it contains all of these children. Okay, so that's the table I'm going to run this table loop on. So in between the two parentheses is where you write the table name. Okay, and let me talk about the I and the V. You can name this anything you want. I doesn't have to be I. I could write anything there. Same with V. But what this spot represents, I, is the index, which is like a placeholder. V is the value or the key. Okay? So, for example, let's do a print shapes. Okay? Or no, let's do print I, V, and I'll show you what I is and what V is. I is the index. So like, for example, we know that we have 8 things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I is going to be numbers 1 through 8, and V is going to be the name of each of these tools. So if I play the game right now in the output window, we should see that table. We should see the I print and the V print next to it. So let's hit play. And oh, I have to call. Hold on, let me stop that for a second. I have to call that function for that to happen, so let me call it. Alright, and now press play again. Oops, I have a misspelling. So, okay, play again. Okay, so now you can see that the print statement worked. And so these numbers are the index, and these are the key, or the value. Okay? And so this table loop iterates through every index, and there's 8. Okay? Alright, I'm not going to leave the print statement there. I just wanted to show you that. I'm going to set up another variable, local kids equals v colon GetChildren. So this is another table being set to the variable of kids. What is v? V is each of these tool names. Okay? Well, so if V is each of these tool names, kids says V GetChildren. That means I'm looking inside of each of these tools, and these are the children. So that's what this table represents. It's all of these children inside of these tools. Okay? So now I'm going to write another table loop for n comma b in pairs kids do. Okay. And in this table loop, I'm going to say b dot transparency equals 0. So we are going to be resetting the transparency of all these children back to 0, because when the touch happens, we're going to make them invisible with a transparency of 1. And since this is the reset, right now, before we've done anything, they're set as 0, which is how we need them to begin. They're visible. At some point in the script, they're going to go invisible. So when I do the reset, I need to iterate through the table and change all of the kids back to 0. From 1 to 0. Okay? That's what that loop is doing. That's what that loop is going to do. And then v dot image dot transparency equals 0. So what this says to do is look at v. Here's v dot image, we're following the hierarchy, dot image, dot transparency. So that's setting the transparency to 0, because at some point in time, just like with the transparency of all the kids being made invisible, this image will be made invisible, and it'll be at 1. So at the reset time, we need it also to change back to 0. Okay. I'm erasing the calling of the function because I'm not ready for it yet. Okay, next we are going to do the touched function. Okay, this is still a function, but it's an event function. Okay, so the difference between this function and the functions above. These functions above, I have to call it, meaning I have to type reset t, open and close parentheses, in order to call it. A touched function is called when the event happens. I won't have to write anything else to make it happen. It happens with an event, and the event is going to be when that player runs up and touches the TP part with the tool. That's the event, and that's when this function will fire, and the code inside of the function will execute at that point in time. And every time the touch happens by a player, this function will be called. So to write that function, we're going to use our TP variable, TP.touched connect. Open and close parentheses, function, open and close parentheses. Now move your cursor into the front of the last parentheses and hit enter. Okay? So this says when the TP is touched, connect this function, fire this function. Okay? Then inside of the open and close parentheses, we're going to type the word hit, and this is a parameter we're using for the touched function. A parameter is a placeholder where it will be used later in the code. Okay. First I'm going to write if not debounce, then, and this is an if statement. An if statement is where if a condition is met, then the code inside of it will run or execute. So this if statement's condition is saying if debounce is false, and we begin with it false. So that means since debounce is false, the code I write in here should execute and run. So I'm immediately going to change debounce to true. Okay? Because as soon as it recognizes it, this change in debounce to true temporarily stops this from being able to happen again until I change debounce back to false. So it's a way to toggle on and off, and true and false, you know, back and forth like a toggle switch. Alright. Now I'm going to set up a variable for the character. Local character equals hit colon find first ancestor of class model. Okay? So let me explain this, and I'm going to explain it by showing you. I'm going to hit play, and if we look over here in our Explorer window and you open up your workspace and you find yourself, the player. So what this line of code is saying is hit is whoever touches the touch part. Okay? And when the player, if the player were the one that touches the touch part, it's saying find first ancestor of class model, and the player is a model. Okay? Or the character. Okay? If you put your cursor on your username, which is in workspace right now because you've hit the play button, you can see up here it's a model. Okay, and I've got an error because I have a misspelling. I'm going to fix that. Okay. Next, local player equals players colon, actually, I'm going to type game colon get service players colon get player from character, and then I'm going to type character in the parentheses. Alright, now I'm going to say if player, then enter. So it's an if statement saying if there's a player, then run this code. Okay, next I'm going to set up a variable called name, local name equals player.name. Here I'm going to get the player name, and I'm naming the variable name. If hit.name equals image. Now I want to talk about the double equal sign versus one equal sign. One equal sign is when you're setting. Two equal sign is where you're looking to see if something equals something. Okay? One is I'm saying it equals this. I'm setting it, which is why we put one equal sign on the variable. But two says look at this and see if it equals that. Okay? So if hit.name equals image and hit.parent colon is a tool, then run the code inside of this if statement. So we know when the player grabs the tool, the part that sticks out on that tool is the item, the part we named image. okay, the little round circle. Because when I play this game and the player's holding that tool in their hand and they run up to touch that touch part, that little circle sticks out a little bit more than the rest of the tool. And the way it's being held in that player's hand, that is the object that's going to hit this. Okay? So I can show you. So let's go over here. I'm going to test here, and I'm going to just get one of the tools, and you can see the player's holding it, and you see it sticks out a little further than the rest of this part. So when I run over here and touch the touch part, okay, and I've got errors because my script isn't finished. Okay. Alright, so inside of this if statement, we're going to set another variable, local in equals hit.value.value. So we know that hit is the image. And if we look in the image and of the, let's look at the shapes and replicated storage, because that's the one that gets cloned, that is in the player's backpack, that they then equip. So if we look at the image, dot value, here's value, this is the string value we set up, dot value. So here it's getting in equals really blue if this were the one that hits the TP part. Okay. Local inserted equals false. This is a Boolean that we're setting up, and it's starting as false. Okay, if table.find color in, then. Okay, this is an if statement saying if you find in the color table, then execute this code. And here we're going to just have a print statement that says this is already in the cauldron. Okay, because what's going to happen is when the player runs up and hits the TP part, we're going to store the color in the table. Okay? But if the table sees the color in there, we don't want anything to happen. The only thing we want to happen is a print statement saying it's already in the cauldron. That way there isn't a repeat of that color, of that tool. And then right below that, we're going to do if not table.find color in, then. Enter. So this if statement says if you don't see in the color table, then run the code inside of this if statement. So this is where we're going to increase the count by 1. Okay? Because we're going to use this count to run code. So because in the script what's going to happen is once the count reaches 7, we know all 7 of the tools have touched the cauldron and that it's complete. So that's why we're doing the count and incrementing up each time it touches. And that's why we don't want duplicates, and that's why we're using a table to store the color So if it's already in the table, we're saying don't include it again and don't do the count, because that would be a duplicate. All right. We're also going to now fire via a remote event some data. So we're going to use the remote event called changed UI, and we named it remote. So we're going to type remote fire all clients, name, comma, in. So what we're sending over to every client is in, that's sitting in the name table. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. We're firing name and in. And then there's going to be another script that receives this. And you'll see that. It'll make more sense once we get to that part. But this is how we send data from the server. Right now we're in a script which is server side. And there will be another script that receives this. Okay, table.insert color in. So at this point in time, because in was not in the table, we're now inserting it into the table. Okay? And then inserted becomes true. So there's our Boolean. It began as false, it's changing over to true because it was inserted into the table. Okay, next, let me see something real quick. We're going to do another if statement. If inserted, then. Okay. So this is going to use the inserted Boolean, which is sitting as true right now. And it's going to say, if it's true, run the code inside of this if statement. So we're going to set a variable, local tool name equals hit.parent.name. Okay. Here we're going to save the tool name in a variable. For I, v in pairs, shapes do. Okay, we're going to iterate through the shapes. If hit.parent and hit.parent.name equals v.name, then run this code. Localplight equals instance.new point light. So here we're going to set up an effect that happens, and the effect is going to happen on these parts that are on this ingredients board. Anytime a player runs up with the object and puts it in the cauldron, we're creating code that makes an effect happen on the matching piece over here. Okay, and we're going to put a point light in it and a particle in it. And it's going to do a little effect, and then this part is going to disappear, which is going to kind of show that it's done already. And it's gone from the board. Okay? So instance new is used to create new objects using script. So the point light does not exist in these tools, and I'm going to create it new via this script and put it in there for a brief couple seconds just to create the effect. So this is my variable. I'm calling itplight, and this right here, instance.new, and then inside of the parentheses is the object you're creating, and I'm creating a point light. Okay? So this doesn't already exist, so it's different than looking for the hierarchy, okay, to store the value. Instead, you're creating a brand new one. Alright, and anytime you create a new object, you need to set the parent so that now it sees the hierarchy. Equals v.image. So the parent is going to be v, which is each of these tools dot image. So if I open the tool, this is image. So this is going to be the parent of the point light.Plight.brightness is going to equal 10. So now I'm setting up some properties for that point light. Plight.range equals 10. Plight.color equals color3.new. 0,0.66667 and comma 1. Okay, so when you're setting a color for color 3, you know that this little color wheel shows up, but if you know what the numbers are, you can click it, but if not, you can just open this color wheel and choose a color. Okay, so that's the properties I'm setting up for the point light. Next, I'm going to destroy the part that touches the TP part. So the tool that's in the player's hand is going to be destroyed. because once it touches, it's served its purpose, and I no longer want the player to have it. So I just want it to be destroyed. Next, we're going to set up a particle. Game.replicatedStorage.particle emitter clone. Okay, so here we are using a particle emitter and cloning it, one we've already gotten built that is sitting in replicated storage. Okay, and we haven't done that yet, but I will show you in the next section. So all it really involves is you highlight replicated storage, click the plus, and find and insert the particle emitter. And then set up all the properties in the way that you want this particle to look. Okay, so I've already got it set up, and I'll show you how to do it. But what this code is doing is cloning it from replicated storage. Okay. You could create it brand new if you wanted to, if you didn't want to already have it sitting in replicated storage to clone it. We could use instance new and set it up all from scratch within the code, but I'm just not doing it that way. Alright, so after you clone it, we have to set the parent, and it's also going to be v.image. Okay. Then we're going to do a task wait for 3 seconds, and that's just how long I want these effects to last. Local kids equals v get children. Okay, so we're going to iterate through the kids again, and this is where we're going to change the transparency to 1 so they become invisible. For n comma b in pairs, kids do. b.transparency, oops, equals 1. If b.name equals image, then b.image.transparency equals 1. So we had to change both the parts and this image to invisible. Okay? And the reason I'm saying if b.name equals image is because we're iterating through all of the kids. Okay? And if I were to simply just write b.image.transparency outside of this if statement, it's going to look in each of these and it's going to error because this is a kid, but if I open it up, there is no image inside of it. Okay, so it would stop the code. So a way to get around this is to say if b.name is image. So now it only looks at this part. Okay, and then goes to the image and then to the transparency property of that image. All right. And then the next thing we're going to do is destroy the particle emitter and the point light because we only wanted them to last for 3 seconds. So now that we're done, we're going to destroy it. v.image.particle, emitter, destroy it. v.image.pointLight, destroy. Okay. All right, so now we're done in the if inserted statement, if statement. So no, we're done with the loop. Okay. We're done with the iterating through the shapes, but we're still inside of the if inserted then if statement. And now we might have other players running around on the map that has a tool in their backpack that someone else just touched the touch part with. And that tool in their backpack no longer will function. If they run up and hit the cauldron, the touch part, nothing's going to happen. And it's already been done, so we might as well just remove it from the player's backpack. So we're going to do a loop for that, a table loop. Whoops, typo. Okay. For underscore, comma, PLR in pairs, players, colon, get players, do. Okay, so it's going to get the players, and we're going to set up a variable for the backpack. Player find first child backpack. If backpack, then. Okay. For underscore item in pairs, backpack, get the children in the backpack. Do. Okay, so remember when I was telling you, when you write a table loop, you can use anything to describe the index and the key. Okay, so these table loops look different than the ones we were writing prior. If item is a tool and item.name equals tool name, then item destroy. So it'll be cleared out of any other player's backpack that might still have that item sitting in there where they hadn't made it to the touch part to touch it. And because another player already did it before them, they don't really need that tool anymore. So we're just going to remove it from their backpack because it serves no purpose anymore. Okay. And I just want to make sure of something real quick. Okay. So now, still within the if inserted then if statement, we're going to type else. Hit dot parent destroy. Okay. Still destroy the tool if it was a duplicate. All right. All right, next on the outside of the if hit name equals image and hit dot parent is a tool, then so scroll down on the outside of that. So in between you've got 3 ends here. We're going to write the next part of the code. Okay. And here we're going to look at the count. So we've been incrementing and counting up. Okay? And once we reach 7, we're going to execute code if the count reaches 7. So if count equals 7, then so we're going to set a variable called local concoction equals true. Okay, and that's a Boolean of true or false. And then local finished equals false. Because I'm going to send these through a remote event. Local GUI equals player dot player GUI WaitForChild rainbow GUI. So our GUI is going to be in starter GUI and it's named rainbow GUI. And on our screen, that's this GUI. Okay, that's our variable for it. Local label equals GUI.textLabel. Okay, so in our GUI, we have a text label, and that's the variable we're setting up for it. Label.visible equals true. And here we're going to fire an event, count event, fire all clients, and we're going to send count. So count at this point in time is 7. Okay, and that's what we're going to send. And we're also going to fire the all found event. Fire all clients, and we're going to send concoction and finished. Concoction is true, finished is false. Then at the very end, we're now going to reset debounce back to false. So all the way at the bottom, debounce equals false. And then we're going to look at count again. If count equals 7, then task wait 10. We're going to wait a few seconds, and now we're going to call our 2 reset functions. That's the final step, and we only want it to happen if count equals 7. Okay? So that's our code. I already have one set up, so I'm going to disable it real quick. Test it just to see if I've got any typo errors going on. Mine's going to work because I have all the other scripts set up. You don't have all the other scripts yet. And I see an error message, so maybe I have a typo somewhere. It says attempt to index nil with visible on line 96. So if I press pause and go to the script, I misspelt label. Okay, so I'm going to play again. I'll go a little bit slower this time, and I'm going to change the view so you can see the effect that happens over here when it touches. So you can see it light up and a particle gets emitted. Okay, and the GUI is working because the color shows up. And let's see what happens if I duplicate one of these. So I'm going to touch with it, and I still have one in my backpack. And it removed it because we wrote that in the script. And it'll do it for the other players as well. Okay? So everything's working, and this was the touch script. And in the next section, we are going to set up the particle emitter. And then after that, we will work on the GUIs. So I will see you in the next section.